Right, we're on the final leg of this massive journey of SOAP 2019. I just wanted to say to start with that I wasn't quite sure of the demographic of this group. It's the first time I've come to SOAP. I think I've increased the average age group by about 1 decade, maybe 2. But it's great. I think I've got a story to tell, so let's get on with it. I just wanted to start off by saying that early on in my career, I failed an aptitude test to become a computer programmer. And I kind of say that because it's kind of almost like a badge of honor in some ways. And I probably shouldn't say that in front of some of you today. But looking back at it then, when I was in my early 20s, it was kind of an easy thing to do. I didn't really know anything. I thought I did. I thought I knew everything, but I didn't really. And I thought, well, I don't really like writing code. I just kind of did it to try and see what avenues it might open for me. But thankfully, it didn't. But looking back on things now, I think I am a coder. I think you'd agree. I think we all are. And it was interesting to hear the conversation in one of the previous presentations yesterday. I think it was yesterday, or was it one of the workshops? No, it was yesterday, about what we call ourselves. Are we technical writers, or are we information developers, or some other title along those lines? So let me just get started here, otherwise I'll be rambling into my 40 minutes. I just want to tell you a little bit about our company, Mimecast. It's the only time I'm going to give any sort of plug to them today. We're a cloud solution, and essentially what we do is we protect our customers' email and web security data. So we started off in 2003 as an email security company, so we basically route our clients' emails through our servers, through our software, and look for various threats and bits of content that we think might be harmful, and then allow them to do various things with it. We've been going since 2003. We've launched on the NASDAQ a few years ago. We're very, very proud of the fact that we've got a very strong customer retention rate. It's one of the highest numbers in the industry. And part and parcel of that customer retention is our content. It's about everything we do relating to content. And what I'm responsible for, and my team is responsible for, is the knowledge-based part of it, which is a huge part of it, but it's really just one other bit of the overall community. So enough about Mimecast. Let's really get on to what you're really here for, which is listen about my journey here. Now, I just want to start off telling you a little bit about how I got to where I am today. So I started off working for a high street bank back in the 80s. Yes, I really am that old. And back then, at least I thought at the time, banking was an honorable profession. But it was a time of excess. Lots of people drinking champagne and sort of burning the midnight oil away. And yes, that was fun for a 20-odd-year-old. But as far as the bank was concerned at the time, it knew it needed IT. It knew it needed software. But that was as far as their strategy of thinking had gone. So what did they do? Well, they had lots of money, so they gave everybody pots of money. They said, there you go and spend it. That was the strategy. Zero, nothing other than thought. So what you ended up with was lots of different departments, lots of branches, going off and doing their own thing. So they would create bits of software. They would go and buy bits of kit to do what they wanted to do. And that was great, because it solved their problem. Trouble is, it didn't solve everybody else's problem. And it got to a stage where you might find, let's say, the manager of the Manchester branch, city centre Manchester branch, got together one evening over a drink with the manager of the Liverpool branch 30 miles down the road. And they're saying, how's it going, Joe? Oh, it's really great. We've managed to implement this system that allows us to see what our customers are spending their money on. And that allows us to target our marketing at them to sell some of our insurance products. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, if only we could do that. Maybe you could send us some data and we could have a look, see how you're doing it. You can't. Why? Because your system doesn't talk to my system. Your bit of software over there has been written in this language, and we write ours in that language. It was like a little mini IT fiefdoms all over the country. And it taught me a lesson, which I still try and remember to this day. In the same way as content, if you've got disparate pieces of content, you're asking for trouble further on down the line. So I want you to think back to the first piece of content you ever produced, professional content? Hands up, anybody who remembers their first piece of professional content. Okay, there's a few there. Keep your hand up if you want to remember your first piece of professional content. Oh, there's one. Well, good for you. Okay, good, I like that. Yeah, I think it's very important to look back at what we produce. In fact, one of the things that we do at Mimecast in my team is we have what we call a content club. So it works in a similar way to a book club. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of a book club. But we take a piece of content, we go individually, we analyze it, come back together as a group, and then we dissect it and we say, this works, that doesn't work so well. And more importantly, try to sort of see whether we can basically pinch an idea from here. We're not immune to a bit of plagiarism, to try and see what we can do to improve what we do. Yeah, so just to show you, I'm going to go through some examples of, well, one example of some of my early content, just to show you that I'm not immune to showing off some of the things I've done in the past. Thankfully, the first thing I ever did as a technical writer wouldn't even run on my laptop anymore. So hopefully it's been destroyed in some sort of data store somewhere. I wouldn't want to show that to you. And just as a by the by, we're always looking out for pieces of content to review. So if any of you are brave enough to come up to me and say, would you mind looking at my content? I'm your man. Come and see me afterwards. So this is an example of a bit of content that I produced in a previous gig, previous job. Now, looking at it now, it's fairly plain, very boring. I mean, this is what, 2000, well, actually, it says the date's 2005. It might be slightly earlier than that. For a lot of the content was produced a lot earlier than that anyway. But this is just a plain sort of, it looks like an ordinary sort of help file you'd find back in the early, the early part of the millennium on a laptop somewhere. It's a compiled HTML file, or CHAM file, as some people call them. And it looks like one deliverable, but it isn't. So it's actually made up on the left-hand side in the TOC. Again, it just looks like one piece of content. But I think it was approaching 20 different deliverables that we just merged together. And that was because we had bits of content in this context, in this particular example, that was useful for everybody. But we had bits of content that were used individually in other places. It had other things as well. I mean, again, this is not really rocket science, not these days anyway. But it had things like dynamic HTML. In this case, it was just a revision history for the article. A lot of our clients were asking for information about what had changed from one release to the other. So we added that. It had buttons on the top. Again, this is, at the time, was fairly cutting edge. It's a bit of scripting at the top there to put added buttons onto the CHM window to link out effectively to other bits of content that we thought might be useful for them. In this case, just the schema and release notes. And lastly, feedback. One of the things you're going to get a lot from me today is making sure we get feedback for what we do. If we don't do that, we've no idea whether what we're doing is successful or not. It's not easy. It can be difficult to deal with the content. You've got to have processes in place, but feedback's a must. So I just want to, again, take you back. I remember this thing. I'm sure some of you will do. I know we've got representatives from Nokia here. This is the old 3310 phone. The old joke about it was that if a builder forgot his hammer in his toolbox, he could use this instead. It did a job. It ruled the world back then. Virtually everybody had a Nokia phone. It had a black and white screen, a very small screen as well. And it's also, it did its job. It made phone calls, but nothing like the standards we got today on our smartphones. I'm also a big fan, or was a big fan of, at the time, of the Scion organizer. It's almost like the precursor of the iPad that we have today. I forgot to bring it on stage, actually, but it's a lovely design. You basically have a foldable keyboard, effectively, and screen that you could fit in that pocket there, fit in the inside pocket of a blazer or a jacket, take it everywhere. It had virtually no functionality compared to what we got on the iPad, but wonderful piece of kit. It could even sync. You could even get a Sony Ericsson phone that had a modem inside it, so you can actually download data, email data into the app inside it. Superb. But look at that phone now, and look at the Scion organizer. Scion doesn't even exist in that form. I think it's got swallowed up by Symbian. I'm not sure what happened after that to Symbian, but looking at those examples, looking at Nokia and Scion, the reason why those phones are not there now, well, obviously the technology is advanced, but it's also, particularly in Scion's case, they didn't really keep up with the trends in the market at the time. So if we're going to boil things down as far as content is concerned, I want to really ram this home. I know we've said it a number of times in other presentations. Write it once and use it as many times as possible. That's a key to lots of things I'm going to cover. So exactly how do we do this? Now, before I answer that question, I should really tell you that I'm not from a structured authoring background. I know a lot of you are. We have never used structured authoring in any of the jobs I've been to, so I'm not an expert on that. But I'm going to really try and sort of cover how you can use content reuse inside other things when you're not using structured content. But it equally applies to structured content as well. Now, I'm going to start off with templates. Now, this sounds really, really simple. And in fact, one of the big advantages of applications like Microsoft Office is they are simple. You click on an icon, and up pops this window, and you can start doing things straight away. But that's a big danger. People don't realize that what they're seeing in front of them, I know we do, but people don't understand what they're seeing in front of them is, in fact, a template. And how many times have you seen users go into Word, click on a new document, and start typing away, save the document somewhere, then the next day they go in, they might change a font title or something, a font weight or something like that, save the document, not as a template, just in their doc file. Next day, go in and do exactly the same thing again. So, yeah, things like Microsoft Office are great. You can reuse content, but use the template and distribute it as well. Elsewhere in other applications, I mean, I'm focusing particularly on authoring applications here, because that's more or less where my background is. Things like Flare and RoboHelp have got page layouts and master pages. The beauty of these things is you can have multiple versions of these. So you might have different templates for FAQ-type documentation compared to process-driven documentation. And you include lots of different things in them. I mean, the same way as Word, breadcrumbs, links, images, company logos, all sorts of different things. I'm also going to talk about snippets. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of snippets, mainly because I've never really uncovered a use case that truly meets their need. Now, I'm not saying that they're not useful. They are, in the right case. But to take this particular example here, this is an example from Madcap. You can see it shows a procedure with a list of bulleted steps, numbered steps inside it. That's great if your process, your content, never needs to change from what you've got inside that snippet. But let's say you had an additional step that needed to be performed between steps 2 and 3. That snippet wouldn't work. So you'd have to do it outside of the snippet. But you can put all sorts of things in there. It's not just text. You can put videos, any sort of multimedia, images, and that sort of thing as well. So they do have their use. But personally, I'd much rather use a variable. Oops, I think I've gone too far. In fact, it's gone way, way too far. There we go. So I'm a much bigger fan of variables. Variables are, I think, have got a much better use case. And I've listed some examples of where we can use them. And I'm going to give you some real-world examples that I've experienced. UI elements. So let's say you've got a menu item inside one of your applications. And one day, the product manager comes to you and says, by the way, John, we're going to rename that menu item from this to that. You don't mind, do you? Well, maybe. Let's just say, I can give you an example here, a real-life example, where exactly that happened to us. And that menu item was mentioned in quite a lot of places. Now, we're a cloud application. All our documentation's in the cloud. So we had the choice. We either had to make the change on the fly to all those places, or we could use a variable. Now, obviously, variables are the way to go in that case. Product names are another example. And again, another use case I've come across. I should probably get told off for saying this. But we've actually had instances where the night before a product release, we've had a whole email trail going off into the ether about what we call the product. Even worse than that, the product was called Sync and Recover, Sync A-N-D, Recover. The whole thread of this email was whether it should be Sync ampersand Recover. Very semantic. I hate marketing. But that was the example we had, and we had to change it throughout all the references, not just in our documentation, but in our sales material, all our pre-sales stuff, everything, marketing, the whole thing. Again, with a variable, you just change it once, and wherever you've got that reference to the variable, it'll update. I've mentioned about mergers and acquisitions. Well, I actually haven't. I'm going to do that now. So mergers and acquisitions, I mean, how many of you have been taken over by another company, or even your company has taken over another company? You know, it happens more often than you think, really. Has that caused issues for your documentation if you've got company names mentioned in there? Yeah, again, another use for variables. Version numbers, copyrights, perhaps a little bit more use case, but again, anything that you want to reuse and change, it's a great use case for a variable. Now, I'm going to talk about XML and DITA, even though I'm not an expert. I mean, you guys probably know a lot more about it than I do. But I do want to talk about in the case of whether it's relevant or not. It does have use cases, as we've talked about in the last couple of days. Translation, localization, content reuse between different departments, marketing, sales, and user documentation, standardization, anything like that. Yes, I can see its use. Is it right for us at Mimecast? No. Why? Well, for a number of reasons, but really, we're a small team. We've got a very iterative process for updating the documentation. We're overworked, undermanned. I know that probably is true to a lot of people here. But it's just not right for us at the moment. Maybe it will be further on down the line. It does have a very, very steep learning curve, which, frankly, we're just not ready for yet. But, it's got its own uses. So, let's talk a little bit about ROI. That's really what we want to hear about, really, I think. That's the nub of trying to change what we're doing, if we're not already doing it. Well, one of the things I think it's important to do is to monetize what we do. If we're trying to change a process or change the tool or do something fundamental with the way we're delivering our content, if we went to our manager and said, hey, Joe, we want to change from tool X to tool B, or maybe we want to change the way we're doing stuff, probably the first thing they're going to do is say, well, what's the benefits of doing that? And they're not necessarily talking about the benefits to you as an individual to produce it. They might be talking about, well, no, we're talking money here. How much time is it going to save you to do it? And that was kind of ably demonstrated, I think, in the presentation we saw after lunch yesterday. Like a bit of improv comedy. It was superbly done. It's that, that balance between writing content and the cost of producing the deliverable. Now, I can think of cases where I've had to go and sort of say, well, OK, let's take an example here. How many times is Mimecast mentioned in our company documentation? I did actually have a quick run through actually before I came here, and I think it's well over 500 locations, maybe multiple times in each location. So if you think about how many times you have to change that if we got taken over, 500 times, open up a file, locating the word, changing it, saving it, publishing the output. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's 2 minutes a page. That's over 16 hours of work. So again, just variable, simple use case, bang. 2 minutes, bang. You just save best part of 2 days' work. So if you were to say to your manager, I want to be able to change, I want to be able to research whether we could change from doing something this way to that way, and just give me a day. If you could say to him, at the end of that day, you could implement something that was going to save your production process, let's say from 1 day to 1 hour. In the space of 7 or 8 days, you've recouped your time. And then you start to get into the positive side of it. I'm going to mention metadata, because I think it's important to think about it in the context of this conference. This conference is code. We don't think of ourselves, so again, going back to what I was saying earlier, I didn't think of myself as a coder, but in actual fact, I'm using tools that allow me to do just that. I can enter tags and keywords into our documentation to make it easier for our users to find stuff. So if they land on a page, that's not necessarily what they want. They can go in and click on a tag to get relevant documentation connected to that tag. I can add breadcrumbs, all sorts of other navigational tips around to help people find out. I'm going to mention synonyms, and I think synonyms are a kind of an interesting use case. You know, people tend to think about synonyms are just for language, you know, to say, let's say you've got a user searching on creating something, or creating a record, but your documentation doesn't use that terminology. You know, it uses adding a record, for example. So you can sort of bring that content of the focus of the user. But it has other uses as well. I can think of an example in a previous job where one of our product names was continually being mistyped in the search engine. So the user was getting no results back. And we managed to run some analytics on the search results which highlighted that. So by putting a synonym in with the mistyped name, but then going to the right name, they were completely unaware they were mistyping the right name, but they're still getting the results back. And then, of course, you've got things like metadata or tags you can add to web pages and stuff like that for SEO. OK, so now that we've talked a little bit about content reuse, I'm going to slightly shift focus a little bit into what we've done at Mimecast. And I'm also quite keen, I'm a bit sort of funny, I tend to go out and look for examples of bad content, which I find quite amusing, or just, it's probably just me, but anyway, there we go. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of stuff I've found over the years that we can dissect and look at. So the first one is an example that actually one of our trainers discovered one day. They had a course to deliver, and they sort of came into the office very early one day, about 7:30, and you know, came in with their coffee, sat down in the training room, opened their laptop, connected the laptop to the projector just to check everything was working okay, and this is what happened. Up comes this message on the screen. Cue panic. Okay, what do I do now? Okay, so the bulb is going to go. It's going to go. It's going to go. Holy shit. Okay, when's it going to go? Is it going to last another 5 minutes? Is it going to last until the IT department come in so they can give me a replacement bulb? Will it last a coffee break? Don't know. So what do? They just hoped, and thankfully it did. Just to show that we, as a company, are not immune to producing duff content. We have mugs in all of our kitchens with the company logo. This is our company avatar, the M is anyway. But they're all the same size, all the same shape, but this one came out which is completely different from all the others, and I'd never seen it before in the 3 years I've been there. I looked at it and I thought, what's that trying to tell me? And I thought, okay, I know what cubed is, but that's up the top right-hand corner. This is down the bottom right-hand corner. So I started racking my brains, and I thought, well, okay, this is probably something to do with algebra, and I have to admit, I hated algebra at school. So I thought, okay, I'll have to Google what this is. Okay, I know it's subscripts. Well, anyway, I went to Google, and I discovered, does anybody remember algebra? Anybody want to remember algebra? No, okay. So we know it's subscript, but what it means is it's a sequence of numbers, and it's the sum of the previous numbers. So if you know what M1 and M2 is, you can work out what M3 is by adding the two values of M1 and M2. But in this instance, I've got no idea what the values of M1 and M2 is. So I can only assume that this is probably, because it's a singular mug, I've never seen it before, this is a relic of a long and distance marketing executive that's since been fired. I don't know. I've asked around, I still can't get the hang of it. I should also just want to add this one. I'll let you read that. I hope you can read it at the back, can you? I love Dilbert. I've got a particular sense of humor, and I think this is a good example of why we can't take our profession too seriously. You know, what's paragraph? How you can tell me to do my job because what you've done is awful. So I put that on deliberately because what I'm going to show you is some of the things that we've done at Mimecast to deliver content in a particular way. And I'm deliberately putting this on because I'm not saying what we're doing is the right way. I mean, I'm sure that you'll have your own opinions about what we've done, but just take this on board. So this is one of our help topics from one of our products, which is basically an add-on into Outlook. And it's obviously talking, you can see from the title there, it's just talking about searching folders. But this particular page was updated over a period of about a year, many times. And it's unfortunate because of this particular product, the way it's structured, we have to support the documentation for multiple versions inside the document that we produce. So one particular piece of functionality was changing a lot. So we got content for saving a search in version 7.4, also content for 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, and lastly, saving content in 7.0. It's awful. I hate doing that. So if we were to take that as an example and say, well, let's just say if we can produce content just for a particular release. So at the end of the day, a user of this piece of software, do they even know what version they're using? Do they care? I wouldn't. I just want to get the content I need for what I need to do. So if I'm getting content for version 7.3 when I'm on 7.4, I couldn't care less. So what you could do here is obviously just tag the content, and there's lots of tools out there that can do it. Tag the content and just say, when you're building the documentation, leave all this other stuff out that's not tagged with that particular tag, and there you've got your deliverable for the software version that you want. I'm going to use this example. This is slightly different. It's not so much the documentation, but it's still content in its own right. So this is an example. What you've got here is a dialog that pops up at the top of the screen every so often, just to remind you to do various tasks inside this is our administration console. So I've just sort of blown it out down the bottom there so you can sort of read a bit more. So it's really just saying, okay, what you need to do is review your maximum retention period, the length of time we're going to hold your data. We say what the maximum is. We give them a reason why they should do it. And lastly, we give a link to the documentation to know how to do it. It's one of the things we're trying to do is trying to make the product as intuitive as possible. But when that's not possible, you have to link out to something. You have to tell them where to do that. So by using the knowledge base, or by links into the knowledge base, which will take them to the particular article, we're able to do exactly just that. This is also a slightly interesting use case. We're starting to use a product which draws users' attention to, well, you can draw attention to anything pretty much. But in this particular example, we're looking at a new piece of functionality that was added that changed. It was kind of a real sort of shift in paradigm shift between the way the users did things previously to the way we want them to do things now. So we had this piece of software implemented that was still, you could still do it the old way. We kind of had the two going by side, but ultimately we're going to switch off the old way of doing it. But we wanted to try and sort of educate users that actually, okay, you did it that way over there, but now we've got this new shiny all singing, all dancing feature over here that does a lot more and this represents the data in a better way over there. Go and use that. So we did this little thing. It's just a little sort of animated, well, it's more like a video really. And obviously you can see there, it's talking about the functionality which is rejected and deferred messages. And a little dialogue on there, well, it looks like a dialogue with a bit of text. But in actual fact, it's a video. So I'm going to try and run this. Hopefully this works. There we go. So it just rolls through a few times, a bit like a vine. But essentially what it's doing is it's just saying, okay, if you want to use this, there's your menu item. Click on that menu item. Go down, select another menu item, and in you go. So it tells them exactly where it is and where to go. Now, this is a bit I'm worried about because I'm not sure whether it's going to work on here. We'll try it. I'll do it on to the next slide. Oh, it does. Good. Now, this is an example. This is not one of ours, but obviously this is an instant message app that we use. We use Slack quite religiously in our organization. And this is a conversation I had with my boss. Now, my boss is based in Boston, so I don't get to see him very much. So he was over in the UK fairly recently, so we'd arranged to meet up for dinner one evening. And unfortunately, he forgot. So I didn't take it personally. But the next morning, I did sort of remind him that he'd forgotten to meet me for dinner. And this is what he said. He said, I'm sorry, I booked the dinner thing. I thought, booked? I'd not heard of that before. I thought, what the hell? I knew what he meant, but I'd never come across it. So I thought, okay, what does anybody do in that situation? You Google book. So this is what you got back. So as you're familiar with Google, you type something into the URL bar and it starts to give you filters that you can use to filter down the content you want to get back. I didn't bother, but as each of these things is basically separate meaning, separate bits of content that you can get back. I just went into Borks and pressed enter, and this is what I got. This is in Chrome. Obviously, it differs slightly in other browsers. I think in Edge you just get more sort of shopping and marketing advice. I hate it. Anyway, so this is in Colum. So you get lots of other bits of content here. You get WAV files that tells you how to pronounce it in case you don't. It tells you the grammatical information and the meaning. That's really what I was interested in. But there's all this other stuff. You know, down the bottom, you've got the usage. So that's why I never heard of it before, because I'm old school. And as you can see from that graph, it suddenly started to be used from about 1980 onwards. And just to be on the safe side, I thought, well, OK, it's got this translation button here. OK, well, that's interesting. So I went in. Funny enough, the default option was Arabic. So I went in, OK, let's translate into Arabic. Do you know what the translation was? Have a guess. Balked, exactly. In Polish, I thought I'd try this one out, as we're obviously in Poland. I'm sure you're not going to agree with this. Yeah, I'm sure that's wrong. Yeah? OK, so it could be right. OK. So, yeah, Google Translate is not always correct. And I'm just going to, as we're coming towards the end, I'm going to, again, use another use case. This is, we have a company away day every year. And this year we went to a hotel in Greenwich in the east of London. It's near the O2. If any of you have been to the O2, it's fairly remote. In fact, they had to build a special underground line just to take you out there, really, when the Olympics were on. But it's about 300, 400 yards away from the tube station, so it's very convenient, and that's how most people get to the venue. Now, our marketing department did a superb job of branding the hotel with the company logos and the message that we were trying to get across for that year. You can see it here. But that's not what I'm interested in. I'm just looking a little bit more left field at content and why, if we don't give people the right content, they'll go and do their own thing. So when you're leaving this hotel, you come out the door there, and you turn left, and you walk down that little path, as you can see in the picture. There it is. And you go to the end where that sort of crane thing is on the right-hand side, and where you want to get to is basically straight ahead. But when you get to the end of the pathway, it takes you round to the left for about 10 yards, across a little service entrance, and then along to the right-hand side, along the railing, sorry, on towards the right-hand side, left-hand side, sorry, and out towards the tube station. But hey, you know, there's never any traffic on that service entrance. So what do people do? Like, sod that. I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to walk across and destroy the grass just to get across the road to the tube station. And I'm going to leave you with one final thought, which is that. I came across this, it's not really written from a content perspective, but I think it equally applies. If we ask ourselves why people aren't doing something, that's the only way we're going to find out whether what we're doing is correct or not. And the why could be anything. It could be, well, I've had a bad experience in the past. It could be, I just don't feel like it, don't know. But ask your users. Go away and ask, do your research. Go and say, why is it that you can't do what you need to do? We have a system in all of our knowledge bases at the moment where people can comment. It's not just, is this article helpful, yes or no. It's, you can put whatever you want in there. And that does cause slight problems. We have to have processes in place because some of the comments that are added on there are not really related to the content, but they're more related to the product. So, it'd be great if the product did this. Okay, right. Well, I'll go and direct that to the relevant person. It's nothing to do with me. I'm not a product person. So you have to have that process in place, and we didn't initially, but it's there now. But equally, it allows the users to be able to have that conversation with you about why they can't do something. And we do find that really useful sometimes. People will say, well, okay, you've worded things this way, but I didn't quite get it until I went over there and read that. Okay. So you can have that conversation with them about specifically what it is they're finding troubles, and then you can correct it. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colum. Guys, questions time. Do we have any? Yes, we do. There's one there.
Hi, John from the UK Railway. A question about the text variables. Do you know what I mean, where you can change one piece of text to another throughout the content? I can see the use for that potentially, but I think in practice why I've never used it or suggested using it in my own content is that it just seems that it would take just as long or maybe longer to add the variable in than it would be just to go through the content and change it further down the line, especially because you might not know what needs to change, or there might be more than one place where the content could change, and if you don't get it exactly right, it seems to be a bit of a gamble with the time it takes to implement that.
Sure. Yeah, it's a fair point. I think the answer to that is to do your variables in advance. So things like product names, you know what your product names are. You know what your menu items are. So when you're producing the content, use the variables at that point. Don't leave it till later on down the line when the change comes in. That's really the way, it's to use that. It's difficult for us because we're a cloud environment and all our content is cloud. And to go back to the example I mentioned earlier on about a menu item changing from one thing to another, we had that choice to make. And unfortunately, the tool we were using at the time didn't have variables, didn't have that functionality. So we were faced with the choice of having to make that change on the fly on 500 articles. Well, that was it. It was one word that had to change in 500 places. So we could take a copy of that content and change it there, and then copy it back, but that just seemed like overkill. So for that particular use case, if we had a variable for the product name or the menu item name, we could just change that one time, flick the switch, and it would update everywhere. So I think the key is to be prepared. So think about the things that could change in the future, and I mean, maybe don't go backwards, but from that point in time, maybe you start using variables for it then. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm looking. 3, 2, yes, one more.
I thought I was going to get away.
No counting next time.
Yeah.
No more questions.
All right, hey, so my question goes back to the very beginning of your talk where you showed your really old help file and you highlighted the need to actually collect feedback from your users on that help file. And I was wondering if you had some anecdote or some more insight or something more to say about that, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can give you a real-world example. It's not from Mimecast, but in a previous job I was in. We had an analytics tool that could do things like tell you the search terms people search for but didn't find results. Things like that, and usual sort of stuff like number of page hits and time they spent on a certain page. But the example I'm thinking of was a search term. There was a particular dialogue that was by far and away the most visited page in our documentation. So I ran this report and got that. Oh, that's really, really odd, because it was just a logon page, right? So you had 3 fields on it. It was user ID, password, and I can't remember what the other thing was, but there was like a little drop down on it. And I thought, how can people not understand what to put in that dialogue? And I thought about it. And then I thought, okay, well, hang on. That dialogue's got a little help link inside it, and people are obviously clicking on that help link to find the help page. I thought, okay, what's the possible scenarios that people would want to click on that icon? And I went through the actual process of logging on, and I tried various scenarios. I thought, okay, I'm going to try mistyping my password. Mistyped it, enter, bang, up comes this message. Completely useless, didn't tell you anything. It just, so I go, what do I do? Oh, there's a help icon, bang. Into the documentation. Did the documentation tell him what to do? No. So I go, that's the answer. So change the documentation, tell the developers, no, I can do the documentation there and then, bang, that's sorted out. Tell the developers, you need to change your dialogue to put some text into these fields or better error messages. And within the course of 3 or 4 months, when we ran the report again, that analytics started to go down. So it's a real-world example. But that's kind of slightly different. That's us getting the feedback from data, effectively. I've also been quite keen, when I can do it, in meeting customers. It's not something a lot of people feel comfortable with doing, and it's obviously it takes a bit of time and a bit of resource and money, frankly, if you have to travel to these places. But if you can do it, it's a really good way of getting that sort of one-to-one feedback from people. Oh.
We can afford one more question. No counting this time. Okay. Thank you so much, Colum, for sharing with us.